Hello and welcome to a fresh new edition of a World Panorama, where we get you all the biggest international news developments that unfolded this week and that are drastically changing our world. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you. Let us start the program with this week's top stories in the headlines. Second Trump-Kim summit breaks down on twin issues of disarmament and sanctions relief. US says can continue talks at a lower level. North Korea asserts won't change stance. Cardinal George Pell of Australia remanded in custody after being found guilty of sexual offences against children. Most senior Catholic figure ever convicted of sexual abuse to be sentenced on 13th of March. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari wins a second term, takes 56% of votes in an election that saw lowest turnout in country's history. Main rival Atiku Abubakar vows to challenge result in court. Afghanistan to hold Grand Council of Tribal Elders and Political Leaders in March to advance peace process, aim to bring Taliban insurgents into dialogue with the wider Afghan society. Centuries-old Loya Jirga is used to build consensus among different factions. And President Omar al-Bashir declares a state of emergency in Sudan to end uprising against his 30 years rule. But protests gather momentum after the announcement. The top story this week, the second summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un ended in failure on Thursday, with the two sides far apart on the central issues of disarmament and sanctions relief. The abrupt end to the Hanoi meeting, which was cut short by several hours, was a setback for both leaders, who had made long journeys, Kim by rail and Donald Trump by air, in the expectation that a deal was within reach. There are no plans for a third summit, but the US has expressed a willingness to continue talks at a lower level. President Donald Trump returning to the White House. This after his summit in Hanoi, Vietnam, with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un collapsed. A development that clouds the future of US-North Korea nuclear diplomacy. The two sides gave conflicting accounts of what happened. While US said that North Korea wanted complete sanctions relief for dismantling the country's oldest and biggest nuclear weapons complex at Pyongyang, North Korea said that US wanted more enrichment facilities apart from Pyongyang to be dismantled. North Korea also said that it asked only for a partial sanctions relief and not a total lifting.
Well, they wanted to denuke certain areas, and I wanted everything. And the sanctions are there, and I didn't want to give up the sanctions unless we had a real program. And they're not ready for that, and I understand that fully. I really do. I mean, they spent a lot of time building it, and that doesn't mean the world has to be happy.
Our proposal was that we will permanently dismantle all of our nuclear material production sites if the US lifts the sanctions that affect our people's livelihood. However, the US insisted that they want one more thing beside the dismantlement of nuclear facilities in the Pyongyang area.
Clearly, the two leaders misread each other. The collapse of the two leaders' talks came suddenly. The signing ceremony was cancelled and the official lunch left uneaten. Many experts say that after the vagueness of the denuclearization statement issued at the end of first summit between the two leaders in Singapore, this was bound to happen. Trump's and Kim's widely different perceptions were exposed in Hanoi. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the two countries could hold further meetings, but there was no plan to do so immediately. However, North Korea says the US had wasted an opportunity that may not come again, and Pyongyang's position would not change even if the US seeks further talks.
They were pretty expansive with respect to what they were prepared to do at Yongbyon, but there were still not complete clarity with respect to the full scope of what it is they were prepared to offer. It's one of the reasons I hope we can get back so that we can put some definition around that.
For the time being, Donald Trump says the status quo will continue, with North Korea continuing to suspend nuclear and missile tests, while the US will not take part in joint military exercises with South Korea. Back home, most lawmakers praised Trump for walking away because of unacceptable demands from the North Korean leader.
He was a big winner, Kim Jong Un, in getting to sit face to face with the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States. And really, it's good that the President did not give him anything for the little that he was proposing.
However, the premature end to the negotiations leaves the unusual rapprochement between the US and North Korea that has unfolded for most of a year at a deadlock, with the North retaining both its nuclear arsenal and facilities believed to be producing additional fissile material for warheads. Also, further progress could be difficult now that Trump has broadcast that he and Kim have staked out conflicting bottom lines. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Big news coming in from Australia, where a key priest has been remanded in custody after being found guilty of sexual offences against children. Cardinal George Pell abused two boys in 1996. The jury found him guilty in December last year. His bail was revoked on Wednesday, placing him in custody for the first time. He will be sentenced on 13th of March. The Cardinal is the most senior Catholic figure ever convicted of sexual abuse. However, he maintains that he is innocent and has lodged an appeal.
Cardinal George Pell, the Vatican treasurer and a former top advisor to Pope Francis, leaving as court began his sentence hearing. Pell was found guilty of child sexual offences committed more than 2 decades ago against 13-year-old boys. The crime allegedly happened 22 years back in the priest's sacristy of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Melbourne, where Pell was Archbishop. Pell will finally be sentenced on 13th March.
The defendant has been found guilty of sexual offences against my client, and I understand that an appeal has been lodged.
The verdict came out on 11th of December last year, following a 4-week trial in the Country Court of Victoria in Melbourne, where Pell was found guilty. However, the case had been kept secret due to legal reasons, but when court lifted the ban on media coverage, details of the case came out. The court heard testimony from one of the victims. The other victim died in 2014. After hearing the testimony, Cardinal Pell was convicted on 5 charges of sexual offences on 2 children under 16 of age. Each of the 5 offences carries a maximum 10 years in jail. However, Pell's lawyer have filed an appeal against the verdict.
He has destroyed the Victorian community. The Catholics in Victoria, we demand that he be excommunicated from the church. George Pell is a monster, a freak. He has to be jailed.
The trial of the 77-year-old Pell again brought the Vatican's abuse scandals into the highest level of the church hierarchy. Judge Peter Kidd said the abuse was callous and brazen, adding it did involve a breach of trust and a degree of impunity. He added that the fallen priest's sentence would need to deter others from committing similar crimes.
I was appalled and shocked, I think any Australian would be, to read of those events. But it shows that no one's above the law in this country. But we do have the law in this country, and that law requires a process now to be followed. So I don't intend to sort of engage in that, other than to say to all of you out there who have been the victims of child sexual abuse, know that we're thinking of you.
The Australian cleric Cardinal Pell rose in prominence as a strong supporter of traditional Catholic values. He was summoned to Rome in 2014 to handle Vatican's finances and was described as the church's third-ranked official. But then his career was dogged first by claims that he covered up child sexual abuse by priests and then later found that he was himself an abuser. The Vatican called the conviction of Australian Cardinal George Pell on sexual child offences as painful news.
The Holy See agrees with the statement issued by the President of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference regarding the sentence of guilt in the first instance concerning Cardinal George Pell. This is painful news. While awaiting the definitive judgment, we unite ourselves with the Australian bishops in praying for all victims of abuse and reaffirm our commitment to do everything possible so that the Church might be a safe home for all, especially for children and the most vulnerable.
In the 1980s, the first cases of molestation of children by priests came to light in the US and Canada. In the decades since, evidence of widespread abuse has emerged globally. Pope Francis has established a committee to tackle sexual abuses. In recent days, he has promised concrete action calling clergy guilty of abuse tools of Satan. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Nigeria's Election Commission declared President Muhammadu Buhari as a winner in the nationwide election held last Saturday. Buhari won a second term at the helm of Africa's most populous state and top oil producer, following an election that was marred by delays, logistical glitches and violence. He took 56% of votes against 41% for his main rival and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party. But hours after Buhari was declared the victor, Abubakar rejected the result and vowed to challenge it in courts.
Celebrations at all Progressive Congress Party's headquarters in capital Abuja as Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari was re-elected for a second four-year term. The 76-year-old defeated his main rival, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, with a margin of nearly 4 million votes. Saturday's election came after the initial vote was postponed on February 16, 5 hours before polls were due to open, being abruptly delayed by a week by officials citing organizational glitches.
We will continue to engage all parties that have the best interests of Nigerians at heart. Our government will remain inclusive and our doors will remain open. That is the way to build the country of our dream. Safe, secure, prosperous, and free of impunity and primitive accumulation by those entrusted with public offices.
However, the opposition's Abubakar's People's Democratic Party has rejected the result, citing election fraud. Turnout was a record low at just 35.6%. Delays and violence made the run-up to Saturday's poll, but no independent observer has cited electoral fraud. The opposition's fraud accusations have heightened tensions in the nation, where 6 decades of independence have seen long periods of military rule, coups, and successionist wars.
I am not speaking as a member of the People's Democratic Party. I am speaking as a Nigerian when I say that the electoral fraud perpetrated by the Buhari administration this past Saturday cannot produce a government of the people for the simple reason that it does not reflect the will of the Nigerian people.
A former soldier, Buhari led a military regime for 20 months in the 1980s and was first elected president in 2015, becoming the first opposition candidate to defeat an incumbent and win the presidency. His record in office is mixed. His critics accuse him of autocratic leanings. However, Buhari supporters say he has largely delivered on campaign pledges such as tackling corruption and cracking down on Boko Haram.
I'm happy that Buhari win the seats back as our new president, because what he's doing, you understand me, he's doing something that will be happy, because people did not understand what the man wants to do, because he have a future, and he have future for Nigeria. Even for we youth, we Yoruba, we are very happy that Buhari win the seat.
Me as a person, I'm not happy. Even Nigeria in general, we are not happy because of the election. But what we need peace in Nigeria. So what we need, we should advise Atiku to go to court if there's we can challenge, if there's any evidence.
Nigeria is Africa's leading oil producer and biggest economy. However, the country faces a range of problems including power shortages, corruption, and an economic slowdown. The World Bank has predicted sluggish economic growth, 2.2% for the coming year in a country with unemployment of more than 20% and nearly half the population living in extreme poverty. Moreover, the country's northeast Nigeria has been dragged a decade-long battle with Islamist militants that has also spilled into neighboring countries. Indeed, the task is clearly cut out before Buhari as he begins his second term. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
In World Panorama, we'll take a very short break. More international stories that made headlines this week are coming up ahead. Stay tuned. Big story from Afghanistan, which will hold a Grand Council of Tribal Elders and Political Leaders, or Loya Jirga, in capital Kabul on 17th of March to advance peace process. The Loya Jirga is a centuries-old institution used to build consensus among competing factions. The Grand Consultative Jirga comes amid Washington's marathon diplomatic efforts to facilitate direct talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban that has been fighting against Afghan and foreign forces over the past 18 years. So far, Taliban has refused to talk to the Kabul government, dismissing it as a foreign-backed puppet regime. There have been plenty of ideas to thrash out an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process by the international players. But it seems that in the end, a Loya Jirga, a traditional assembly of Afghan leaders, is likely to take center stage. Afghanistan will hold a Grand Assembly, or what is called Loya Jirga, of tribal elders and political leaders next month. On agenda will be the issue of how to end the Taliban insurgency. Over 2,000 participants from all walks of society across the country, chosen by special committees, are expected to meet in Kabul for a 4-day debate on peace efforts with the Taliban on 17th of March.
The main goal of holding the Loya Jirga or Grand Assembly is to reach national consensus for peace in the country. This is the main and comprehensive goal of it.
The Loya Jirga is a centuries-old institution in Afghan politics used to build consensus among competing interest groups. It was used to lay the foundations of a post-Taliban society following the US-led campaign that ended their rule in 2001. According to Afghan constitution, a Loya Jirga is the highest expression of the Afghan people. Its decisions enjoy a constitutional cover and gain formal legality after the government approves its verdicts. The Jirga will be inaugurated by President Ashraf Ghani himself at the Presidential Palace. The United States is also expected to convince the Taliban to send a delegation to Jirga.
If they are Afghans, in principle, they are supposed to be invited. In practice, it's the commission, the supervisory commission of the Loya Jirga that has to make the final decision. But in principle, yes, they are part of the category that needs to be invited.
The US government has been holding back-to-back talks with the Taliban to end the 17-year conflict. The most recent one was held on 25th of February in Qatar capital Doha. Separately, Russia has sponsored some of the talks and Iran has also hosted a few negotiations so far. However, the Afghan government has for long been ignored from the reconciliation process with the Taliban.
Whatever deal is reached between the US and the Taliban, ultimately Afghan government, Afghan political groups, they have to come up with some kind of solution that can sustain or ensure peace returning to Afghanistan.
Hence, with the Taliban so far refusing to talk to the Kabul government, the Loya Jirga is seen as a way of bringing the insurgents into dialogue with wider Afghan society. The timing of Loya Jirga is also significant, as Afghan presidential elections are slated for 20th of July, and it is important to attain peace before then. Over the 17 years since the US launched the war in Afghanistan, over 30,000 civilians have been killed. The situation in the country has been aggravated, with more than half of its territory controlled by the Taliban. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has called for forming a new government capable of tackling local issues and meeting citizens' needs. Bashir's decision came in a meeting with the Sudanese Prime Minister Mohamed Tahir Ayala, who was appointed on Friday. President Bashir on Thursday declared a year-long state of emergency all over Sudan and dissolved the central and state governments after more than 2 months of popular protests in the country. Sudan President Omar al-Bashir declared a year-long state of emergency all over Sudan and dissolved the central and state governments. A state of emergency was declared in an attempt to end a 10-week uprising that has threatened to bring an end to his 30 years in power.
I declare the state of emergency all over Sudan for 1 year, and the central and state governments will be dissolved.
Al-Bashir also said tight economic measures should be adopted by a new government, adding that he would ask an executive working team with running the government until the process of dialogue is completed. The president also urged the parliament to postpone constitutional amendments that would allow him to seek a new term in a presidential election in 2020. He urged the opposition forces to join the national dialogue to engage in consultations regarding current and future issues.
The economic crisis has affected the life of Sudanese people a lot, so we will take stricter economic policy to alleviate the situation.
However, Bashir's declaration was widely anticipated and protesters took to the streets even before his speech ended. Since then, the protests have increased with thousands of demonstrators in the capital, Khartoum, and Omdurman, its twin city across the River Nile. The opposition Oman National Party and protest organizers, the Sudanese Professionals Association, have both rejected the new measures and called for more protests to force Bashir to step down. Since the state of emergency was declared, hundreds of pickup trucks with mounted machine guns have been deployed onto the streets, along with armored personal carriers. Activists and protests have ridiculed the declaration of a state of emergency with all the extra powers it gives the security forces. His resignation as president is the key demand of the ongoing anti-government demonstrations, which started in mid-December. Since December last year, various cities, including the capital Khartoum, have witnessed popular protests over deteriorating economic conditions, featuring fuel, grain and cash in shortage and price hikes of basic commodities. At least 32 people were reportedly killed during the 2 months of protests, including 3 security personnel. Sudan has been rapidly expanding its money supply in an attempt to finance its budget deficit, causing spiraling inflation and a deep decline in the value of its currency. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And finally, it was a case of unusual emergency in the western German town of Bensheim-Euerbach. A team of firefighters were called after a fat rat was found stuck, wedged halfway through a manhole cover. The team got to work on the rodent, freeing the distressed animal in a matter of minutes. Once the rat was safely released, it scurried back into the sewer. So take a look at these visuals as we take your leave. We'll see you next week with another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.